Have you ever walked into a conversation knowing exactly what hurt you, only to walk out apologizing for bringing it up? That is not confusion. That is not you being too sensitive. And it is not always just a hard relationship. Sometimes it is manipulation working exactly the way it was designed to work. Today we are talking about dark psychology, not the dramatic social media version, where everyone suddenly becomes a villain, but the real psychological patterns that show up in families, marriages, co-parenting relationships, friendships, workplaces, and even parent-child dynamics. We are talking about the moments when guilt replaces honesty, silence becomes punishment, love becomes conditional, and your nervous system starts working overtime just to keep the peace. Because manipulation does not always look like control at first. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it sounds like, I'm only saying this because I love you. Sometimes it hides behind victimhood, charm, generosity, or being the fun parent. And before you know it, you are explaining yourself in circles, doubting your memory, managing someone else's emotions, and wondering why every conversation leaves you feeling smaller. In today's episode, we are going to name the patterns clearly. We are going to talk about gaslighting, guilt induction, DARVO, triangulation, intermittent reinforcement, narcissistic traits, Machiavellian behavior, and the family system damage that happens when children are pulled into adult emotional games. Most importantly, we are going to talk about how to recognize these patterns without losing yourself in them. Because once you can name the pattern, you can stop being controlled by it, and that is where your power begins. Welcome back to the Path to Peace Therapy podcast. I'm Stephanie Buckley, parenting strategist, family systems coach, ADHD specialist, and someone who has spent years helping families understand the deeper emotional patterns underneath the behaviors that keep repeating. I work with parents, teens, young adults, and families who are often exhausted by the same arguments, the same shutdowns, the same emotional explosions, and the same invisible tension that seems to live in the house, even when nobody is saying anything out loud. I created this podcast because so many parents and partners are living inside patterns they can feel but cannot always name. They know something is off. They know certain conversations leave them confused, guilty, anxious, or emotionally turned upside down. They know they started with a simple concern and somehow ended up apologizing for having feelings. They know the relationship feels like a maze, but nobody handed them a map. And that is exactly why today's episode matters. Today we are talking about dark psychology and manipulation. Now, I know that phrase sounds dramatic. It sounds like something from a crime documentary, a TikTok rabbit hole, or one of those videos where someone whispers, "Here are 3 psychological tricks to make anyone obsessed with you," which, by the way, should be our first little red flag wrapped in a ring light. But underneath the trendy language is something very real. There are patterns of relating where one person uses another person's emotions, empathy, fear, guilt, loyalty, attachment needs, or confusion as tools for control. And here is where I want to be very careful. This episode is not about labeling everyone difficult as toxic. It is not about turning every selfish moment into a diagnosis. All of us can be defensive. All of us can be immature. All of us can manipulate occasionally when we are scared, overwhelmed, dysregulated, or trying to avoid shame. A child may cry harder to avoid bedtime. A teenager may say, "You never trust me," when what they really mean is, "I want fewer limits." A spouse may sulk because they do not know how to ask directly for connection. That is human behavior. That is not automatically dark psychology. What we are talking about today is different. We are talking about repeated patterns of emotional influence that bypass another person's free choice. We are talking about dynamics where someone does not simply express a need, but instead uses guilt, confusion, fear, silence, triangulation, charm, blame, or emotional punishment to get control. We are talking about what happens when manipulation becomes a relational strategy, not a one-time reaction. And if you are listening as a parent, this episode is especially important because children do not just hear what happens in a family system. They absorb it. They learn whether conflict is safe. They learn whether truth is allowed. They learn whether love comes with strings attached. They learn whether feelings are information or weapons. And when manipulation lives inside a family system, children often become the emotional weather vanes of the home. They sense every shift in tone, every change in facial expression, every silence at the dinner table, every parent who is pulling them closer for comfort or loyalty. Today, we are going to slow this down. We are going to define what dark psychology actually means. We are going to talk about the dark triad, which includes narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. We are going to unpack manipulation, gaslighting, DARVO, intermittent reinforcement, guilt induction, stonewalling, silent treatment, and triangulation. And most importantly, we are going to talk about how these patterns affect families, children, co-parenting, marriage, and your own nervous system. Because when you can name the pattern, you stop drowning in confusion. And when you stop drowning in confusion, you can start leading yourself and your family differently. The phrase dark psychology is not an official clinical diagnosis. You will not open the DSM and find a neat little category that says dark psychology disorder. But the phrase has become popular because it gives language to something people experience in real relationships. It describes patterns of influence, control, deception, emotional exploitation, and manipulation that can happen in families, romantic relationships, friendships, workplaces, religious communities, social groups, and co-parenting dynamics. Clinically, the phrase is often connected to what researchers call the dark triad. The dark triad refers to 3 personality trait clusters that can be especially harmful in relationships when they are strong, persistent, and unbalanced by empathy or accountability. Those traits are narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These are not always visible in obvious ways. This is very important. People with these traits are not always screaming, threatening, or acting like movie villains. Many are charming, many are successful, many know exactly how to present themselves in public. Some are beloved at work, adored at church, respected in the community, or seen as the fun parent by outsiders. That is part of what makes these dynamics so confusing. The person may look wonderful from the outside and feel emotionally unsafe on the inside. Other people may say, "But they are so nice," or "They would never do that," or "Are you sure you are not overreacting?" And when that happens, the person being manipulated often begins to doubt their own lived experience. That self-doubt is one of the most psychologically damaging parts of manipulation. It does not just hurt you in the moment. It slowly erodes your trust in your own perception. Narcissism, in this context, refers to a pattern of inflated self-importance, entitlement, lack of consistent empathy, sensitivity to criticism, and a need for admiration or control. Narcissism exists on a spectrum. Healthy narcissism helps a person have confidence, ambition, and self-respect. Pathological narcissistic traits, however, make relationships feel one-sided because the person's need to protect their image becomes more important than the emotional reality of the people around them. For example, a parent with narcissistic traits may not be able to tolerate a child saying, "That hurt my feelings." Instead of listening, they may respond with, "After everything I do for you, you are going to call me a bad parent?" Notice what just happened. The child brought up pain, and the parent converted that pain into an attack against themselves. The child is no longer allowed to be hurt because the parent's image must be protected. That is not emotional repair. That is emotional reversal. Machiavellianism is a pattern of cold, strategic, calculated behavior in relationships. The term comes from Niccolo Machiavelli, whose name became associated with political strategy, power, and manipulation. In personality psychology, Machiavellianism refers to treating people as pieces on a chessboard rather than as human beings with their own needs and boundaries. A highly Machiavellian person may not explode emotionally. They may be calm, strategic, and patient. They may gather information, use secrets, create alliances, or tell partial truths in order to shape how others see a situation. In a family, Machiavellian behavior might look like one parent privately telling a child, "Your mother is just unstable. You know how she gets," while publicly acting cooperative. It may look like someone planting small seeds of doubt over time rather than making one dramatic accusation. It may look like using money, access, praise, affection, or family reputation as tools of control. This kind of manipulation can be especially hard to identify because it often happens quietly and slowly. In the subclinical sense, does not mean someone is automatically violent or criminal. That is the Hollywood version. And Hollywood loves a dramatic villain because apparently subtle emotional harm does not come with enough background music. In real life, psychopathic traits can include shallow emotional experience, low remorse, impulsivity, lack of empathy, risk-taking, and the ability to harm or exploit others without feeling the same internal distress most people would feel. A person with strong psychopathic traits may be very charming in the beginning because charm is useful. They may appear emotionally connected when they are pursuing something, but once they get what they want, the warmth disappears. The key thing to understand is that dark psychology is not about one bad moment. It is about a pattern of using people rather than relating to them. Healthy relationships require mutuality. Mutuality means both people's needs, feelings, and perspectives matter. Manipulative relationships are built on extraction. One person extracts validation, obedience, loyalty, money, attention, emotional labor, status, or control from the other person while giving back just enough warmth to keep the person attached. We need to separate influence from manipulation because this distinction is everything. Influence is not bad. Every healthy family uses influence. Parents influence children when they teach values. Partners influence each other when they share needs. Teachers influence students. Coaches influence athletes. Therapists influence clients by offering reflection, language, tools, and a different way of seeing the problem. Healthy influence respects the other person's agency. Agency means the ability to think, choose, decide, and act from your own internal self. When I say to a child, "Screen time is over because sleep matters for your brain," I am influencing them with information and structure. They may not like it, but I am not manipulating them. I am giving a limit that is clear, predictable, and connected to their well-being. Manipulation is different because manipulation tries to bypass agency. It does not say, "Here is what I feel, here is what I need, here is what I am asking." Instead, manipulation says, "I am going to use your guilt, your fear, your loyalty, your empathy, your anxiety, your attachment needs, or your confusion to get you to do what I want." A simple example would be a parent saying to an adult child, "If you really loved me, you would come over this weekend." That is not a direct request. A direct request would be, "I would love to see you this weekend. Are you available?" The manipulative version ties love to compliance. It suggests that if the adult child says no, they are not loving. That creates guilt and obligation rather than genuine connection. Another example is a spouse saying, "Go ahead, go out with your friends. I will just sit here alone, like I always do." Again, the person may genuinely feel lonely. That feeling may be real. But instead of saying, "I am feeling disconnected and would love to plan time together," they use guilt to control the other person's behavior. The partner is no longer responding from love. They are responding from emotional pressure. In family systems, manipulation often disguises itself as concern. A parent may say, "I am only telling you this because I care," while sharing information that undermines another parent. A grandparent may say, "I just worry about the kids," while creating doubt about the parent's decisions. A co-parent may say, "The children need to know the truth," while giving them adult information they are not developmentally equipped to carry. This is why manipulation is so confusing. It often wears the costume of love, concern, loyalty, protection, or morality. But the emotional impact tells you something important. After healthy influence, you may feel challenged, but you still feel respected. After manipulation, you often feel anxious, guilty, foggy, obligated, or strangely responsible for someone else's emotional state. Manipulation works because it targets the most human parts of us. It targets attachment. Attachment is the deep emotional bond that helps us feel safe, connected, and secure with others. Human beings are wired for attachment from birth. Babies survive because they attach. Children regulate through attachment. Adults still need attachment, even if we call it partnership, friendship, belonging, intimacy, loyalty, or family. When someone manipulates your attachment system, they are not just playing with your thoughts. They are activating your nervous system. Your body may respond before your logical mind catches up. You may feel panic when someone withdraws. You may feel guilt when someone is disappointed. You may feel a desperate need to explain yourself when someone misunderstanding. Your nervous system is designed to detect relational threat. When someone you love pulls away, becomes cold, punishes you with silence, or suggests that you are the problem, your brain may interpret that as danger. The amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, begins scanning for risk. The amygdala is like the smoke alarm of the brain. It does not always know whether the smoke is from a house fire or burnt toast, but it will sound the alarm either way. In manipulative relationships, the amygdala can become overactive because the emotional environment is unpredictable. This is where the prefrontal cortex comes in. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain involved in planning, impulse control, perspective taking, decision making, and emotional regulation. I often call it the CEO of the brain because it helps organize our responses rather than simply react. But when the amygdala is activated, the prefrontal cortex can go partially offline. That means the person being manipulated may struggle to think clearly, remember what they wanted to say, hold boundaries, or evaluate the situation logically. So when someone says, "Why didn't you just leave?" or "Why did you keep explaining yourself?" or "Why did you believe them?" they are missing the neurobiology of manipulation. When your attachment system is activated and your nervous system is flooded, you are not operating from your calmest, clearest, most strategic self. You are trying to restore safety. Manipulation also works because it often uses intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement is a behavioral psychology term that means rewards are given unpredictably. This is the same principle that makes slot machines so addictive. You do not win every time. You win just often enough to keep pulling the lever. In relationships, intermittent reinforcement looks like warmth, affection, apology, praise or closeness, followed by withdrawal, criticism, coldness, blame, or emotional absence. For example, a partner may be loving and attentive for 3 days, then suddenly become distant and irritated. A parent may praise a child one moment and shame them the next. A co-parent may be cooperative for a week and then hostile without warning. The person on the receiving end becomes hyper-focused on getting back to the good version of the person. They think, if I can just say it the right way, behave the right way, stay calm enough, explain enough, or love them enough, maybe we can get back to the good part. That hope is powerful. It is also what keeps many people stuck. Manipulation works because it uses your empathy against you. Empathy is the ability to understand or feel another person's emotional experience. Empathy is beautiful. It is the foundation of secure relationships. But when empathy is paired with poor boundaries, it can become self-abandonment. You begin to understand the other person so much that you stop protecting yourself. You say, they had a hard childhood, or they are stressed, or they do not mean it, or they only act this way because they are hurt. And some of that may be true, but explanation is not the same as excuse. A person's pain may explain their behavior, but it does not give them permission to repeatedly harm you. One of the most common manipulation tactics is guilt induction. Guilt induction means making another person feel responsible for your emotional state in order to control their behavior. Guilt is not always bad. Healthy guilt helps us repair when we have violated our values. If I snap at someone and later feel guilty, that guilt can motivate me to apologize. But manipulative guilt is different. Manipulative guilt makes you feel guilty, not because you did something wrong, but because you did not do what the other person wanted. A mother might say to her adult daughter, I guess I will just spend the holiday alone since you have your own family now. A divorced parent might say to a child, I hope you have fun with your dad. I will be fine here by myself. A spouse might say, I work so hard for this family, and this is the thanks I get. In each example, the message is not simply sadness. The message is, your choice caused my pain, and now you must fix it. This becomes especially damaging for children because children are naturally egocentric in development. Egocentric does not mean selfish in a moral sense. It means children tend to interpret events through their own role in them because their brains are still developing perspective taking. So when a parent communicates, you made me sad, the child may internalize, I am responsible for my parent's emotional stability. That child may grow into an adult who overfunctions, people pleases, apologizes too quickly, avoids conflict, and feels selfish whenever they have needs. Another tactic is gaslighting. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where someone repeatedly distorts reality in a way that causes the other person to doubt their memory, perception, or sanity. Gaslighting is not simply disagreeing. Two people can remember an event differently without gaslighting. Gaslighting is more systematic. It involves denying what happened, minimizing the other person's experience, rewriting the story, or accusing the person of being too sensitive, crazy, dramatic, unstable, or impossible to please. For example, a child says, "You screamed at me in the car," and the parent responds, "I did not scream. You are so dramatic. This is why nobody can talk to you." The child started with a reality-based concern. The parent responded by denying the behavior and attacking the child's credibility. Over time, the child may stop trusting their own emotional signals. They may think, maybe I am dramatic, maybe I am too sensitive, maybe I cannot trust myself. Gaslighting is especially harmful because it attacks the person's inner compass. Your inner compass is your ability to know what you saw, felt, heard, sensed, and understood. When that compass is repeatedly challenged, you become easier to control because you start outsourcing reality to the manipulator. Then there is DARVO, which stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. DARVO is one of the most important patterns to understand because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It often happens when someone is confronted with harm they caused. First, they deny it. Then, they attack the person bringing it up. Finally, they reverse the roles so they become the victim and the harmed person becomes the offender. A spouse says, "When you mocked me in front of the kids, that really hurt." The other spouse says, "I did not mock you. You are always looking for a reason to criticize me. I cannot believe you would attack me after the day I had." Now, the original concern has vanished. The person who was hurt is now defending themselves. They may end up saying, "I am sorry, I did not mean to attack you." That is DARVO. The conversation entered through the front door of accountability and exited through the side window of confusion. Silent treatment is another tactic. Silent treatment is not the same as taking space to regulate. Healthy space sounds like, I am too upset to talk productively right now. I am going to take 20 minutes and then I will come back. Silent treatment is punitive. It is designed to create anxiety, fear, and emotional pursuit. It says, I will remove connection until you comply, apologize, or become uncomfortable enough to chase me. For children, silent treatment from a parent can be terrifying. Children rely on parental connection for emotional safety. When a parent withdraws love, warmth, eye contact, or speech as punishment, the child may experience that as attachment threat. They may become frantic, overly pleasing, or emotionally shut down. Over time, they may learn that love is conditional and conflict equals abandonment. Stonewalling is related but slightly different. Stonewalling means shutting down, refusing to engage, giving one-word answers, leaving the room, or emotionally blocking the conversation. In some cases, stonewalling is a nervous system response. A person may be flooded and genuinely unable to talk. But in manipulative dynamics, stonewalling becomes a tool. It prevents accountability. It controls the pace of the conversation. It teaches the other person that bringing up concerns leads nowhere. Then we have triangulation. Triangulation happens when a third person is pulled into a two-person tension to reduce anxiety, gain power, create jealousy, build alliances, or avoid direct communication. Bowen family systems theory talks extensively about triangles because triangles are one of the most common ways families manage anxiety. A triangle forms when person A has tension with person B, but instead of resolving it directly, person A pulls in person C. In co-parenting, triangulation may look like one parent telling the child, your mom will not let me see you more because she is controlling. In marriage, it may look like a spouse telling a child, your father never helps me, so I guess it is just you and me. In extended families, it may look like a grandparent saying, your parents are too strict. You can always tell me what is really going on. The child becomes emotionally recruited. They are no longer just a child. They are now a messenger, ally, therapist, judge, or emotional support person. This is deeply dysregulating for children because it violates the generational boundary. A generational boundary is the emotional line that separates adult responsibilities from child responsibilities. Children should not be carrying adult conflict. They should not be asked to emotionally protect one parent from another. They should not be made responsible for managing adult loneliness, anger, resentment, or image repair. When triangulation becomes chronic, children can develop parentification. Parentification is when a child is placed in an adult-like emotional or practical role before they are developmentally ready. Emotional parentification may look like a child comforting a parent after every conflict. Practical parentification may look like a child taking care of siblings, household needs, or adult responsibilities because the adults are emotionally unavailable or chaotic. Parentified children often look mature, responsible, and impressive from the outside. Inside, they may feel anxious, overburdened, resentful, guilty, and unable to relax. Manipulation inside a family system rarely announces itself clearly. It often becomes the emotional wallpaper of the home. Everyone adapts to it, but nobody names it. One person's mood determines the temperature of the house. One person's approval becomes the prize. One person's anger becomes the storm everyone tries to avoid. One person's victimhood becomes the emotional center of gravity. In a family with manipulation, children often become highly skilled at reading the room. This is called hypervigilance. Hypervigilance means the nervous system is constantly scanning for threat. A hypervigilant child may notice tiny changes in tone, facial expression, footsteps, cabinet doors closing, or how a parent puts down their keys. They may know within seconds whether it is a good night or a bad night. This may look like emotional intelligence, but it is often survival intelligence. The child is not relaxed. They are monitoring. For example, A child may hear the garage door open and immediately assess the parent's mood. Are the footsteps heavy? Did the door slam? Is the parent quiet? Did they say hello? Are they looking at their phone? Is the other parent tense? That child may adjust their behavior instantly. They may become extra cheerful. They may disappear into their room. They may try to distract the parent. They may help more than usual. They may warn siblings to be quiet. This is the child becoming a nervous system manager for the family. Another pattern is overfunctioning and underfunctioning. In family systems theory, overfunctioning means one person takes on too much responsibility for the emotional or practical functioning of others. Underfunctioning means another person becomes less responsible, less accountable, or less capable because someone else is carrying the load. Manipulative families often create overfunctioners. The overfunctioner becomes the fixer, explainer, smoother, apologizer, planner, emotional translator, and crisis manager. A parent may overfunction by constantly trying to prevent the manipulative parent from exploding. A child may overfunction by behaving perfectly to keep peace. A spouse may overfunction by managing the other person's emotions, schedule, reputation, or relationships. The problem is that overfunctioning may reduce short-term conflict, but it reinforces the long-term dysfunction. It teaches the manipulative person that other people will keep absorbing the consequences. Children in these systems may also develop role rigidity. Role rigidity means family members get locked into fixed roles that serve the system but limit the individual. One child may become the golden child, the one who reflects well on the family and receives approval when they perform correctly. Another may become the scapegoat, the one blamed for the family's tension. Another may become the lost child, quiet and unseen. Another may become the caretaker, responsible for everyone else's emotions. These roles are not random. They help the family system maintain balance, even if the balance is unhealthy. The golden child may keep the family image intact. The scapegoat may carry the blame, so the adults do not have to examine their own behavior. The caretaker may regulate the parent. The lost child may reduce conflict by needing very little. But over time, these roles become emotional prisons. The golden child learns love is performance. The scapegoat learns they are the problem. The caretaker learns their needs are secondary. The lost child learns invisibility is safety. This is why manipulation is not just a relationship issue. It is a developmental issue. It shapes identity, it shapes self-trust, it shapes attachment patterns, it shapes how children understand love, conflict, boundaries, and responsibility. Co-parenting with a manipulative person can be particularly painful because the children become the shared emotional territory. A manipulative co-parent may not be interested in genuine collaboration. They may be interested in control, image, punishment, or winning. And the healthier parent can become exhausted trying to co-parent with someone who is not playing by the same emotional rules. One common pattern is image management. Image management means controlling how others perceive you, often at the expense of truth or accountability. A manipulative co-parent may present as fun, generous, relaxed, or victimized, while privately undermining the other parent. They may buy gifts, loosen rules, ignore structure, or position themselves as the child's preferred parent. Then, when the structured parent sets limits, the child may see that parent as the problem. This is where the structured parent has to be very careful not to over-explain or emotionally compete. Children do not need a counter-smear campaign. They need steadiness. They need one parent who does not pull them into the adult war. They need emotional leadership that says, you are allowed to love both parents. You are not responsible for adult issues. In this home, we tell the truth, we keep structure, and we treat each other with respect. Another co-parenting pattern is loyalty conflict. Loyalty conflict happens when a child feels that loving one parent betrays the other. This can happen when one parent subtly or directly communicates hurt, anger, jealousy, or rejection when the child enjoys time with the other parent. A child might come home excited from a weekend and notice one parent becomes cold. The child learns to hide joy. They may downplay good experiences. They may become emotionally split, presenting differently in each home to protect each parent. This is deeply stressful for the developing nervous system. Children are not designed to manage adult loyalty politics. They are designed to be loved, guided, protected, and allowed to develop their own identity. When a child has to constantly monitor what they can say about one parent in front of the other, they lose emotional freedom. A manipulative co-parent may also use information control. Information control means selectively sharing, withholding, or distorting information to shape someone's perception. This may look like telling the child adult financial details, legal details, divorce conflict, or private emotional grievances. It may look like saying, "I would love to pay for that, but your mom took all my money," or "your dad does not care about this family." These statements may feel satisfying to the parent in the moment, but they burden the child with adult narratives they cannot process. The healthier parent's job is not to become perfect. The job is to become regulated, clear, boundaried, and consistent. That means you do not have to answer every provocation. You do not have to defend every accusation. You do not have to attend every argument you are invited to. Sometimes the most powerful co-parenting sentence is, "I am not going to discuss adult issues through the children." Another is, "Please send scheduling information by email." Another is, "I will respond to logistics, not personal attacks." Empathic people often feel ashamed when they realize they have been manipulated. They think, "How did I not see it?" Or, "Why did I keep giving chances?" Or, "Why did I explain myself so many times?" But empathy is not stupidity. Empathy is a strength. The issue is that empathy without boundaries can become a doorway for manipulation. Many empathic people have a high capacity for mentalization. Mentalization means the ability to imagine what another person may be feeling, thinking, or intending. This is usually healthy. It helps us be compassionate. It helps us repair relationships. But in manipulative dynamics, highly empathic people may over-mentalize. They may spend so much energy trying to understand the manipulator that they stop asking, "What is this costing me?" For example, a partner may say, "He acts this way because his father was so critical." That may be true, but the next question must be, is he taking responsibility for healing that pattern, or is everyone else expected to absorb it? A parent may say, "My adult child lashes out because they are anxious." That may be true, but the next question is, are we building skills and accountability, or are we allowing anxiety to become a free pass for disrespect? A child may say, "Mom gets mean because she is stressed." That may be true, but no child should have to normalize emotional harm as the price of understanding a parent. This is where we need the concept of differentiation of self, which comes from Bowen family systems theory. Differentiation means the ability to stay connected to others while still maintaining your own thoughts, values, boundaries, and emotional clarity. A well-differentiated person can say, "I care about you, and I am still allowed to say no." They can say, "I understand you are upset, and I am not responsible for fixing your entire emotional state." They can say, "I can love you without agreeing to be controlled by you." Low differentiation often looks like emotional fusion. Emotional fusion means two people's emotional states become overly merged. If you are upset, I must fix it. If you are angry, I must shrink. If you disapprove, I must change. If you withdraw, I must chase. Manipulative people benefit from emotional fusion because it gives them control over the emotional climate. Differentiation interrupts that control. This is why boundaries are not just behavioral tools. Boundaries are nervous system tools. A boundary tells your nervous system, "I am allowed to exist separately. I am allowed to have a reality. I am allowed to make choices. I am allowed to disappoint someone without abandoning myself." Children exposed to manipulation often do not say, "I am in a manipulative family system." They say things like, "I do not want anyone mad at me." They say, "I feel bad when I say no." They say, "I do not know what I want." They say, "I feel responsible for everyone." They say, "I hate conflict." They say, "I always pick people who need me." That is how early family patterns become adult relationship templates. One major impact is self-doubt. If a child's feelings are repeatedly minimized, denied, mocked, or reversed, they may learn not to trust themselves. A child who says, "That hurt," and hears, "You are too sensitive," learns that pain is not enough evidence. A child who says, "I remember it differently," and hears, "That never happened," learns that memory is dangerous. A child who says, "I need space," and hears, "You are selfish," learns that boundaries equal betrayal. Over time, this child may become an adult who needs external validation before making decisions. They may ask 5 people whether they are allowed to feel upset. They may write long texts explaining themselves because they fear being misunderstood. They may stay in harmful relationships because they cannot tell whether their discomfort is valid. Another impact is conflict avoidance. Conflict avoidance means avoiding disagreement, confrontation, or emotional honesty because conflict has been associated with danger. In a healthy family, conflict can be uncomfortable but repairable. In a manipulative family, conflict may lead to punishment, withdrawal, rage, blame, or emotional reversal. So the child learns to keep peace at any cost. The problem is that peacekeeping is not the same as peace. Peacekeeping often means one person is swallowing reality, so the system does not erupt. True peace requires honesty, accountability, repair, and emotional safety. Children may also develop anxious attachment. Anxious attachment is a relational pattern where a person becomes highly sensitive to signs of rejection, abandonment, or disconnection. They may seek reassurance, over-apologize, fear being too much, or become preoccupied with the other person's mood. In adulthood, this may show up as staying in inconsistent relationships because unpredictability feels familiar. Other children may develop avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachment is a pattern where closeness feels unsafe or overwhelming, so the person copes by becoming emotionally independent, distant, or self-contained. These children may grow into adults who say, "I do not need anyone," when underneath that independence is a history of learning that needing people hurts. Some children move between both. They desperately want connection, but when connection becomes too vulnerable, they shut down. That push-pull pattern is often rooted in inconsistent caregiving, emotional unpredictability, or manipulative family dynamics. This is why parents need to understand these patterns, not because we want to blame families forever, but because insight gives us choice, and choice is where healing begins. When you begin recognizing manipulation, the first instinct is often to explain harder. You think, if I can just make them understand, they will stop. But with manipulative dynamics, more explanation often becomes more material for the other person to use. This is why one of the first skills is reducing emotional supply. Emotional supply means the emotional reaction, attention, defense, pleading, confusion, or distress that fuels the manipulative pattern. This does not mean you become robotic or cruel. It means you stop handing over your nervous system as evidence in the trial they keep creating. A practical tool is called the gray rock method. Gray rock means becoming emotionally neutral, brief, and uninteresting when engaging with someone who uses provocation to get a reaction. You do not over-explain. You do not defend every accusation. You do not try to win the emotional courtroom. You respond to facts, logistics, and necessary information. For example, if a co-parent writes, "You are impossible and always trying to control everything," You do not write back 3 paragraphs proving your character. You might say, I will pick up the kids at 5 o'clock as planned. That is it. Boring? Yes. Effective? Often. The manipulator wants the tennis match. You put the racket down. Another skill is boundary scripting. Boundary scripting means preparing short, clear language ahead of time so your prefrontal cortex does not have to invent a sentence while your amygdala is doing a fire drill. Examples include, I am willing to discuss logistics, not insults. I am not going to involve the children in adult issues. I hear that you are upset. My decision remains the same. I am going to end this conversation now and return to it when it is respectful. That does not work for me. I am not available for that. Notice that these scripts are not dramatic. They are not speeches. Boundaries do not need a dissertation. Sometimes we think the perfect explanation will make the other person respect the boundary. But the boundary is not dependent on their approval. That is the whole point. Another step is reality anchoring. Reality anchoring means creating practices that help you stay connected to what actually happened. Manipulative dynamics create fog. Writing things down can help. After a confusing conversation, you can jot down, what was my original concern? What did they say? Did the topic get reversed? Did I end up apologizing for something unrelated? What do I know to be true? What boundary do I need? This is not about obsessing. It is about protecting your perception. When someone repeatedly distorts reality, documentation can become an anchor. You also need support outside the manipulation system. This may be a therapist, coach, trusted friend, support group, attorney, spiritual leader, or family member who understands emotional manipulation. Isolation strengthens manipulation. Wise support weakens it. The key is choosing people who do not simply inflame you, but help you think clearly. You want support that regulates you, not support that pours gasoline on the fire and hands you a microphone. And if children are involved, one of the most protective things you can do is create a home environment where truth is calm, boundaries are predictable, and emotions are allowed without becoming weapons. You do not have to tell children every adult detail. In fact, you should not. But you can teach them emotional literacy. Emotional literacy means having language for feelings, boundaries, needs, and relational patterns. You can say, in our family, you are allowed to say how you feel. You can say, you are not responsible for adult emotions. You can say, it is okay to love people and still have boundaries. You can say, if someone tries to make you feel guilty for having a need, pause and check in with yourself. You can say, kindness does not mean letting someone control you. Those sentences become internal architecture. They help children build a self. Healing from manipulation is not just leaving a relationship or setting one boundary. Sometimes leaving is necessary. Sometimes legal protection, therapeutic support, or safety planning is necessary. But healing also means rebuilding your relationship with yourself. Manipulation trains you to look outward. What do they think? Are they mad? Did I say it wrong? Should I apologize? How do I fix this? Healing requires turning inward again. What do I feel? What do I know? What do I need? What is my boundary? What is mine to carry and what is not mine? This is where self-trust becomes central. Self-trust is the ability to believe your own perception, values, and internal signals. If you have been gaslit, guilted, triangulated, or emotionally punished, self-trust may feel rusty. That does not mean it is gone. It means it needs rehabilitation. Think of it like physical therapy for the nervous system. You do not rebuild a muscle by yelling at it. You rebuild it through repetition, consistency, and tolerable challenge. Every time you notice a feeling and do not dismiss it, you rebuild self-trust. Every time you set a small boundary and survive someone's disappointment, you rebuild self-trust. Every time you say, I do not need to over-explain this, you rebuild self-trust. Every time you choose clarity over chaos, you rebuild self-trust. For parents, healing also involves breaking intergenerational transmission. Intergenerational transmission means patterns, trauma responses, beliefs, and relational habits get passed from one generation to the next. This does not happen because parents are bad. It happens because unexamined patterns repeat. What we do not consciously transform, we often unconsciously transmit. But here is the hopeful part. Awareness changes the trajectory. A parent who can say, "I grew up with guilt. I do not want to parent through guilt," is already interrupting the pattern. A parent who says, "I was triangulated as a child. I will not make my child my emotional partner," is changing the family system. A parent who says, "I was taught that love meant compliance. I want my child to learn that love and boundaries can coexist," is giving their child something new. This is the heart of family systems work. We are not just treating one symptom. We are looking at the whole emotional ecosystem. We are asking, what pattern is the family repeating? Who carries the anxiety? Who gets blamed? Who overfunctions? Who withdraws? Who controls? Who absorbs? Who is not allowed to tell the truth? Once we see the system, we can begin to change it. And that is where peace becomes possible. Not fake peace, not silence, not everyone tiptoeing around the most reactive person, real peace. The kind of peace that comes from clarity, structure, accountability, emotional honesty, and boundaries that actually hold. If you are listening today and something in this episode made your stomach drop a little, I want you to pause and be gentle with yourself. Recognition can feel unsettling. Sometimes naming a pattern brings grief. You may grieve the relationship you thought you had. You may grieve the childhood you did not get. You may grieve the amount of time you spent trying to get someone to understand something they may have benefited from not understanding, but recognition is also power. Once you can see manipulation, you can stop confusing it with love. Once you can name gaslighting, you can stop handing over your reality. Once you understand DARVO, you can stop following every reversed accusation down the rabbit hole. Once you recognize triangulation, you can stop letting children become emotional messengers. Once you understand intermittent reinforcement, you can stop mistaking inconsistency for chemistry, hope, or proof that the good version is finally coming back. And perhaps most importantly, once you understand your own nervous system, you can stop shaming yourself for how long it took to see it. You were not foolish. You were attached. You were hopeful. You were empathic. You were trying to make love work. Those are not character flaws. Those are human qualities. Now the work is to pair those qualities with boundaries, differentiation, clarity, and protection. Because empathy without boundaries can become self-abandonment, but empathy with boundaries becomes wisdom, and that is the path forward. This episode is for educational purposes and to provide support. It's not a substitute for professional mental health evaluation, diagnosis, or treatment. The more we learn to recognize the signs behind the behaviors, the more compassion and support we can offer to our kids, our partners, and ourselves. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this episode was helpful, I'd love it if you shared it with a fellow parent, caregiver, or educator who might need it too. You can also subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes and check out additional tools and resources at thepathtopecetherapy.com. Follow me on Instagram at thepathtopecetherapy. If you are in California, I offer virtual sessions if you are not in the Hermosa Beach and South Bay area. You can book online at The Path to Peace Therapy. And as always, take a deep breath, give yourself some grace, and remember, peace is possible, and you don't have to do this alone.